The sound of the sewing machine had always been a comfort to Eleanor, not today. Today, the silence in the house was deafening as she stood in the doorway of what used to be her sanctuary. Where her sewing table had stood for 23 years, there were now clothing racks. Where her fabric had been neatly organized in clear bins, there were now shoes dozens of pairs. Where the quilt she'd been working on for her first grandchild had been carefully pinned to her design wall, there now hung a full-length mirror with lights around the edges. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. She'd only been gone 5 days. 5 days to visit her sister in Oregon, who just had knee surgery. 5 days, and her daughter Melissa had completely transformed her sewing room into what looked like a boutique clothing store. "Mom, you're home early." Melissa's voice came from behind her, excitement evident rather than guilt. At 32, Melissa had recently moved back home after her divorce temporarily, she'd said, just until she found her footing again. Eleanor had welcomed her with open arms, making space in the kitchen cabinets, adjusting her routines, even giving up her preferred parking spot in the garage. Eleanor turned slowly, her 62 years suddenly feeling heavy on her shoulders. "What happened to my sewing room?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Melissa's smile faltered only slightly. "Surprise! I know you've been saying you wanted to redecorate in here. It was so cluttered, Mom. I've organized everything for you." She gestured proudly to a small plastic bin in the corner. "All your sewing stuff fits in there. Isn't that amazing? And now, we both have space for our things. It's perfect." The bin couldn't have been more than 18 inches square. 23 years of quilting supplies, fabric collections, patterns, and projects including the baby quilt for her expected grandchild supposedly fit in that tiny container. "Where's the quilt I was working on?" Eleanor asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "The one for the baby?" Melissa waved her hand dismissively. "That old thing? It was taking up so much space on the wall. I put it away." She pointed to the bin. "I folded it up nice and neat." Folded it up. The pins. The careful arrangement of pieces that had taken Eleanor weeks to perfect. All ruined. "And my sewing machine? My fabric?" Eleanor pressed, still standing in the doorway, unwilling to step fully into a room she no longer recognized. "The machine's in the garage. It was so bulky. And honestly, Mom, you had way too much fabric. I donated most of it to the church thrift store. They were so grateful." "I kept the pretty pieces, though." Melissa pointed to a small stack on a shelf, maybe 20 fat quarters out of Eleanor's collection of hundreds. Eleanor felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was a realization. This house, which had been her home for 35 years, where she'd raised her children, where she'd nursed her husband through his final illness 7 years ago, where she'd finally created a space that was just for her, it no longer felt like hers. "Melissa," she said calmly, "those weren't your things to give away." Melissa rolled her eyes slightly. "Mom, it was just fabric. You can buy more if you really need it, but you hardly ever sew anymore anyway." Eleanor almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement. She'd been in this room nearly every day since her retirement 4 years ago. She taught quilting at the community center twice a week. She'd made quilts for every family member, for charity auctions, for babies born in their church. She'd even started selling some of her designs online, building a small business for herself. "I sew every day, Melissa." "Well, now you can try something new. Maybe take up gardening or something more." Melissa seemed to search for the right word. Age appropriate. The word stung more than Eleanor would have expected. Age appropriate. As if at 62 she should be shuffling around in a rocking chair instead of creating art with fabric and thread. "I need to go out for a while," Eleanor said, turning away from the doorway and the betrayal it contained. "Where are you going?" "I thought we could order in and watch that new rom-com," Melissa called after her. "I just need some air," Eleanor replied, grabbing her purse and car keys. She drove without conscious thought, finding herself at Riverside Park, where she and Thomas used to walk together on Sunday afternoons. She made her way to their bench overlooking the water and sat down heavily. The magnitude of what had happened hit her all at once. It wasn't just about the sewing room, it was about respect, about boundaries, about having the one space that was truly hers violated and dismantled without her consent, about having her passion dismissed as a trivial hobby rather than the vital creative outlet it had become. As Eleanor watched the river flow past, steady and sure, a plan began to form in her mind. She wasn't going to yell, she wasn't going to cry, she was going to take back control of her life. Her first stop was Cedar Street Storage. She rented a climate-controlled unit, paid for 6 months in advance, and requested access for early the next morning. Her second stop was Jen's Quilting Haven, where her friend Jennifer was just closing up shop. "Eleanor, I wasn't expecting you today. How was your trip to see Marie?" Jennifer asked, her smile fading as she saw Eleanor's expression. "What's wrong?" Eleanor explained what had happened, her voice breaking only once when she described the quilt she'd been working on for her grandchild. Jennifer's face darkened with each detail. "She had no right," she said fiercely when Eleanor finished. "No right at all." "I know." Eleanor sighed. "And the thing is, I don't think she even realizes what she's done. To her, it was just cleaning up a messy room. To me, it was everything." Jennifer locked the shop door and put up the close sign. "Come on, let's go to the back. I've got tea, and we need to make a plan." Over chamomile tea and leftover scones from the morning's quilting class, Eleanor and Jennifer strategized. By the time Eleanor left 2 hours later, she felt stronger. She had options. She had support. And most importantly, she had clarity about what she needed to do. The house was dark when Eleanor returned. A note on the kitchen counter informed her that Melissa had gone out with friends and would be back late. Perfect. Eleanor went to the garage first, relieved to find her sewing machine still there, covered with an old sheet. She checked it over carefully, it seemed undamaged. Next, she went to the former sewing room, now Melissa's closet extension, and retrieved the small bin containing what was left of her quilting supplies. As she feared, the baby quilt was ruined. The carefully arranged pieces had been folded and crammed into the bin, pins still attached, fabric now distorted and stretching in odd directions. Eleanor sat on the floor and allowed herself 5 minutes to mourn the loss of weeks of work. Then she got up, put the bin in her car, and went to bed. She didn't sleep much. Instead, she lay awake thinking about Thomas and what he would advise her to do. They had always been partners in the truest sense, supporting each other through life's challenges. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, they'd faced it together, making every decision as a team until the very end. "What would you do, Thomas?" she whispered into the darkness. The answer came to her with such clarity that she almost felt he had whispered it back. "You know what to do, Ellie. You've always known." At 6 the next morning, Eleanor was at the storage unit. By 9, she had moved all her most precious possessions, photo albums, Thomas's watch collection, the quilts she'd kept for herself, her grandmother's Chinento the unit. She worked methodically, making several trips between the house and the storage facility. On her last trip back to the house, Eleanor stopped at Wilson Real Estate and asked to speak with agent Sarah Wilson, an old friend who had sold them the house 35 years ago and was remarkably still working at 71. "Eleanor, what a lovely surprise!" Sarah greeted her with a warm hug. "What brings you in today?" "I'd like to sell my house," Eleanor said simply. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that is news. Any particular reason? I thought you loved that place." "I did. For a long time. But it's too big for just me, and I think it's time for a change." Eleanor didn't elaborate further. And Sarah, with the wisdom of her years, didn't press. The market's good right now, Sarah said, slipping seamlessly into professional mode. Your neighborhood is especially desirable. When were you thinking of listing? Today, if possible. Sarah couldn't hide her surprise this time. Today? Eleanor, that's unusual. Most people spend weeks, even months preparing to sell. The house is in excellent condition. I've maintained it meticulously. There's nothing that needs to be fixed or updated. It was true. Eleanor had always taken pride in her home, and after Thomas passed, maintaining it had become even more important to her. Even so, there's paperwork, photographs, measurements, Sarah began. I can sign whatever you need right now, Eleanor said firmly. You've been to my house many times. You know the layout. Use photos from when you listed the Hendersons' house down the street. Tour floor plans are identical. As for measurements, I have those at home. I can bring them to you this afternoon. Sarah studied her friend's face. Eleanor, is everything all right? Eleanor softened slightly. It will be, Sarah. I just need to make this change. For me. After another moment of consideration, Sarah nodded. All right, let's get started on the paperwork. But promise me you'll tell me if you change your mind. Selling a home is a big decision, especially one with so many memories. I promise, Eleanor said, though she knew her mind was made up. By the time Melissa woke up around 11, Eleanor was back home, sitting calmly at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop open to apartment listings. Morning, Mom, Melissa yawned, heading straight for the coffee maker. What are you looking at? Apartments, Eleanor replied. Melissa peered over her shoulder. Those are cute. Are you helping someone look for a place? I'm looking for myself, actually. Melissa paused in the act of reaching for a mug. What? Why would you need an apartment? Because I'm selling the house, Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. Melissa laughed nervously. Very funny, Mom. Is this because of the sewing room? Look, I can move some things around if you want to set up your machine in there too. There's plenty of space. Eleanor closed her laptop and looked directly at her daughter. This isn't a joke, and it isn't just about the sewing room. I've already listed the house with Sarah Wilson. She thinks it will sell quickly. The color drained from Melissa's face as she realized her mother was serious. You can't just sell the house. This is our home. It's my home, Melissa. Your name isn't on the deed, and you haven't contributed to the mortgage or maintenance in the 14 years since you moved out. Eleanor's voice remained steady. And yes, while what you did to my sewing room was the catalyst, this decision is about something more fundamental. It's about respect. This is insane, Melissa said, setting her empty mug down with a thud. You're overreacting. It was just a room. It wasn't just a room to me, Eleanor replied. It was my space, my sanctuary. You didn't ask. You didn't consider what it meant to me. You just decided your needs were more important than mine. So you're punishing me by selling our family home. Where am I supposed to go? Melissa's voice had risen to a near shout. You'll have plenty of time to find a place. The sale won't happen overnight. And I'm not punishing you, Melissa. I'm making a decision that's right for me. I've spent most of my life putting everyone else's needs before my own, your father's, yours, and your brother's. I don't regret that, but I'm 62 years old. It's time I started prioritizing myself. Melissa stared at her mother as if seeing her for the first time. I don't even know who you are right now, she said finally. I'm the same person I've always been, Eleanor replied softly. I'm just finally standing up for myself. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Melissa made several phone calls, presumably to friends, speaking in hushed, angry tones. Eleanor continued her apartment search, making a list of properties to visit. That evening, as Eleanor was preparing a simple dinner for herself, the doorbell rang. It was her son, Michael, looking concerned. Mom, what's going on? Melissa called me freaking out about you selling the house. Eleanor sighed. Come in, Michael. Would you like some dinner? I'm just making a stir-fry. Michael followed her to the kitchen, watching as she efficiently chopped vegetables. Mom, talk to me. Is this true? Are you really selling the house? Eleanor explained what had happened with the sewing room and her decision to sell. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled. I had no idea Melissa did that, he said when she finished. That was completely out of line. Yes, it was, Eleanor agreed. But as I told her, this isn't just about the sewing room. It's about respect and boundaries. And honestly, Michael, it's about me figuring out what I want for this next phase of my life. Michael was quiet for a moment, absorbing his mother's words. I get it, Mom, I do, but selling the house seems extreme. Couldn't you just ask Melissa to move out? I could, Eleanor acknowledged. But the truth is, even before this happened, I've been thinking it might be time for a change. This house is full of memories, wonderful memories, but it's also too big for just me. The maintenance, the yard work, the cleaning. It's a lot. I'm not getting any younger. You could hire help, Michael suggested. Or I could come over more often to help out. Eleanor smiled at her son's concern. You have your own family to take care of, Michael. And yes, I could hire help, but why maintain a 4-bedroom house when I only need 1 or 2 bedrooms? It doesn't make sense practically or financially. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that it made Eleanor's heart ache. I wasn't prepared for this house. It's where Dad and I built that tree house, where Melissa had her sweet 16 party, where we had Christmas every year. And we'll always have those memories, Eleanor said gently. But we can make new ones too, in new places. Change isn't always bad, Michael. He nodded slowly. I know, it's just hard. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this better than I would have. If someone had destroyed my workshop, I probably would have lost it. Eleanor laughed softly. Oh, believe me, I wanted to. But your father always said that the best decisions are rarely made in anger. He was right about that, Michael agreed. He hesitated, then asked, Have you told Jason yet? Jason was Michael's 16-year-old son, Eleanor's only grandchild, until Michael's wife gave birth to their second child in a few months. Not yet. I was hoping you might help me with that. Jason loves this house too. We'll tell him together, Michael promised. He stayed for dinner, and by the time he left, he seemed more at peace with Eleanor's decision, if not entirely happy about it. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor viewed several apartments, finding a lovely 2-bedroom unit in a senior living community that offered independence along with amenities like a fitness center, community garden, and best of all, a dedicated crafting room where residents could set up projects and leave them out between sessions. Sarah called with news that there was already significant interest in the house, with 3 showings scheduled for the weekend. Eleanor began packing in earnest, methodically working through each room, sorting items into categories: keep, donate, sell, storage. Melissa alternated between cold silence and tearful pleas for Eleanor to reconsider. She enlisted various family members to try to change Eleanor's mind, leading to a series of uncomfortable phone calls and visits. Eleanor remained polite, but firm, with everyone. I've made my decision, she told her sister Marie during one such call. And frankly, I'm surprised at how everyone seems more concerned about Melissa being inconvenienced than about what she did to my personal space. It's not that, Marie protested. It's so unlike you to make such a drastic change so suddenly. Is it? Eleanor questioned. Or is it that everyone's so used to me going along with what everyone else wants that they're shocked when I finally do something for myself? There was a telling silence on the other end of the line. As Eleanor continued packing, she came across items that brought back memories both sweet and painful. Thomas's favorite sweater still hanging in the closet. The measuring marks on the wall of the kitchen where they'd tracked Michael and Melissa's growth over the years. The dent in the living room wall from when Jason had been learning to ride his hoverboard indoors despite being told not to. Each memory tugged at her heart, making her question her decision momentarily. But then she would remember the dismissive way Melissa had spoken about her sewing, that old thing, age-appropriate, and her resolve would strengthen again. On Friday afternoon, Eleanor was in what had once been her sewing room, now returned to its closet state by Melissa, who was out at a job interview. Eleanor was removing the few remaining personal items she'd stored in the room's closet when she found either mother's hand-pieced quilt that had been missing since Melissa's reorganization. It was stuffed unceremoniously into a garbage bag, crumpled among old clothes Melissa had apparently decided to discard. The quilt that Eleanor's mother had worked on during the last year of her life, finishing just weeks before she passed away. The quilt that Eleanor had carefully preserved for 15 years. Eleanor sank to the floor, the quilt clutched to her chest, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not just for the quilt or the ruined baby project, but for all of it, the disrespect, the dismissal of her passions, the casual discarding of her treasures. That was how Michael found her an hour later when he stopped by to drop off some empty boxes. "Mom?" he called, concerned, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" Wordlessly, Eleanor showed him the quilt and explained where she'd found it. Michael's jaw tightened. "This has gone too far. I'm calling Melissa." "No," Eleanor said, wiping her eyes. "It won't change anything. She doesn't understand what these things mean to me, and I don't think she ever will." "Then she should go stay with friends until the house sells," Michael insisted. "You shouldn't have to deal with this while you're trying to pack up your life." Eleanor shook her head. "She's my daughter, Michael. Despite everything, I won't put her out on the street." "She put your quilt in a garbage bag, Mom, Grandma's quilt." "I know," Eleanor sighed. "And that hurts more than I can say, but two wrongs don't make a right. Your father taught us that." Michael helped her up and gave her a tight hug. "You're a better person than most, Mom, but promise me you'll at least lock your bedroom door from now on. I don't want anything else of yours to get reorganized." Eleanor promised, and together they carefully folded her mother's quilt and placed it in a proper storage container, which Michael then carried out to his car for safekeeping until Eleanor moved. As Michael was leaving, Melissa returned from her interview. The siblings exchanged tense nods but no words as they passed each other on the driveway. "How did the interview go?" Eleanor asked when Melissa came inside, trying to maintain some normalcy despite everything. "It was fine," Melissa replied curtly. She glanced at the stack of empty boxes Michael had brought. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" "Yes, I am," Eleanor confirmed. "Sarah already has several interested buyers. She thinks we might have an offer by early next week." Melissa's face crumpled slightly. "I don't understand why you're doing this to me," she said, her voice small. "I know I messed up with your sewing stuff, but this is extreme." Eleanor chose her next words carefully. "Melissa, finding Grandma Mary's quilt stuffed in a garbage bag today helped me realize something important. This isn't just about you redecorating my sewing room without permission. It's about a pattern of behavior that I've allowed for too long." "What pattern?" Melissa asked defensively. "I've only been back home for 3 months." "Yes, but in those 3 months, you've rearranged the kitchen without asking, used my credit card without permission for your car repair, invited friends to stay overnight without telling me, and now completely dismantled the one room in this house that was exclusively mine. Each time, I said nothing. I made excuses for you. I told myself you were going through a hard time with the divorce. But enabling this behavior isn't helping either of us. Melissa stared at her mother, a mixture of shock and indignation on her face. So this is… what? Tough love? No, Eleanor said firmly. This is me recognizing that at 62 years old, I deserve to live in a space where I feel respected and valued, where my belongings aren't discarded or donated without my consent, where my passion for quilting isn't dismissed as an old lady hobby. This is me choosing myself, possibly for the first time in my adult life. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of unspoken feelings. Melissa opened her mouth as if to argue, then closed it again, looking suddenly uncertain. I never meant to make you feel unvalued, she said finally, her voice quiet. I know you didn't, Eleanor acknowledged. But intent and impact are different things, and the impact of your actions has been significant. Melissa nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. So what happens now? Now, we both move forward. I've found an apartment I like in the Riverside Senior Community. It has a craft room where I can set up my sewing machine and work on projects. You'll need to find your own place, which I know you were planning to do eventually anyway. This just accelerates the timeline. The Riverside place? But that's for old people, Melissa blurted, then immediately looked contrite. I know what you mean, Eleanor said evenly. And yes, it's for seniors, which I am, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. It offers the independence I want with amenities that will make my life easier. It's my choice, Melissa. Something in Eleanor's tone seemed to finally reach her daughter. Melissa looked at her mother, really looked at her perhaps for the first time, seeing not just Mom, but Eleanor Mason, a woman with her own needs, desires, and boundaries. Okay, Melissa said softly. I guess I better start looking for a place too. It was a small concession, but Eleanor recognized it for the progress it was. I think that would be wise. And Melissa, I hope you know that despite everything, I love you very much. That will never change. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, Mom. I'm sorry about everything. It wasn't a specific apology for any of the things Melissa had done, but Eleanor accepted it as a starting point. There would be time for more conversations, for deeper understanding. For now, this acknowledgement was enough. As Melissa went upstairs to her room, Eleanor turned back to her packing, a new sense of peace settling over her. The house would sell, she would move to her new apartment. Life would continue, different, but perhaps better than before. She picked up a framed photo of herself and Thomas on their 30th anniversary, just a year before his diagnosis. They were standing on a beach in Hawaii, smiling broadly at the camera, the sunset painting the sky behind them in brilliant oranges and pinks. You would understand, she whispered to his image. You always did. She carefully wrapped the frame in bubble wrap and placed it in a box labeled Bedroom Priority. This was one of the items that would go with her to the new apartment. A reminder of the life she'd shared with Thomas, and the strength she'd found within herself since losing him. As Eleanor sealed the box, she felt a curious lightness in her chest. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she was looking forward to what came next. Not just accepting it or making the best of it, but genuinely anticipating it with hope and excitement. Tomorrow, potential buyers would walk through her home, seeing possibilities for their own futures within these walls. And Eleanor would watch them with understanding, knowing that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of what was to embrace what could be. The first potential buyers arrived promptly at 10 the next morning. Eleanor had spent hours making sure the house was immaculate, a habit ingrained from years of homemaking. She'd always taken pride in maintaining a welcoming home, even when the children were small and chaos threatened to overtake every surface. Mrs. Mason, the Thompsons are here, Sarah called from the entryway. Eleanor smoothed her hands over her blouse and took a deep breath. This was really happening. She plastered on a smile and went to greet the young couple who might soon own her home. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Eleanor said, extending her hand. "I hope you'll feel the warmth this house has to offer." The Thompsons, probably in their early 30s, smiled politely as Sarah began the tour. Eleanor trailed behind, listening as Sarah pointed out the updated kitchen, the spacious living room, the recently refinished hardwood floors that Thomas had insisted on when they'd bought the place, saying, "If we're going to put down roots, Ellie, let's do it right." Eleanor felt a pang as the memories surfaced, but pushed it aside. This was the right decision. She knew it in her bones. When they reached what had been Eleanor's sewing room, now Melissa's expanded closet, Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up. "Oh my goodness, look at this closet space! It's amazing!" she exclaimed, running her hand along the clothing racks. Mr. Thompson laughed. "There goes our savings. You're already planning how to fill it, aren't you?" "A girl can dream," his wife replied with a wink. Eleanor stood silently in the doorway, a complex mix of emotions swirling inside her. On one hand, she felt a fresh wave of grief for her lost creative space. On the other, there was a certain ironic validation in Mrs. Thompson's enthusiasm at least someone appreciated what the room had become. Sarah caught Eleanor's eye and gave her a questioning look. Eleanor nodded slightly, letting her friend know she was okay. The tour continued to the master bedroom, where Eleanor had meticulously made the bed with her best linens. The Thompsons wandered through the attached bathroom, commenting appreciatively on the double sinks and the large shower that Thomas had installed during their 25th anniversary renovation. "The backyard is my favorite part," Eleanor offered as they headed downstairs again. "We've grown everything from tomatoes to tulips out there." The tour concluded in the kitchen, where Sarah provided the Thompsons with information packets about the neighborhood, schools, and property taxes. Eleanor excused herself to allow them to talk privately with Sarah, retreating to the front porch where she sat on the swing Thomas had hung when Michael was just a baby. 20 minutes later, the Thompsons emerged, thanking Eleanor for the tour. "Your home is lovely, Mrs. Mason," Mrs. Thompson said warmly. "I can tell it's been well loved." "It has," Eleanor agreed simply. "I hope whoever buys it will love it just as much." After they left, Sarah joined Eleanor on the porch swing. "They're very interested. They mentioned making an offer after they see a couple more houses this afternoon." Eleanor nodded, watching a pair of cardinals flit among the branches of the maple tree in the front yard. "They seem nice." "They are," Sarah confirmed. "Elementary school teacher and an accountant. First child on the way." She paused, studying Eleanor's face. "You doing okay with all this?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Yes and no. It's harder than I expected to watch strangers assess every corner of the home where I've lived most of my adult life. But it also feels right. Like this chapter is ending exactly when it should." Sarah squeezed her hand. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right decision. Not just about selling, but about standing up for yourself with Melissa. It's about time." Eleanor smiled ruefully. "Better late than never, I suppose." "Exactly. And Eleanor, Thomas would be proud of you." Those words stayed with Eleanor through the rest of the day as two more potential buyers toured the house. By evening, she was exhausted from maintaining a pleasant demeanor while strangers examined her life's container. Melissa had conveniently made herself scarce, texting that she was having dinner with friends and would be back late. Eleanor was enjoying the rare quiet, sitting in her favorite armchair with a cup of chamomile tea when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment she considered not answering. But old habits die hard, so she set aside her tea and went to the door. Standing on her porch was Denise Porter, Melissa's best friend since high school. In her arms was a large paper grocery bag. Denise, Eleanor said, surprised. Melissa isn't home right now. I know, Denise replied. I came to see you, actually. May I come in? Curious, Eleanor stepped aside to let her in. They'd always gotten along well, though they weren't particularly close. Denise had been a fixture in their home during Melissa's teenage years, and Eleanor had always appreciated her sensible influence on her sometimes impulsive daughter. Denise followed Eleanor to the kitchen, setting the bag on the counter. I heard you're selling the house, she said without preamble. News travels fast, Eleanor observed, wondering exactly what Melissa had told her friend. Melissa called me crying yesterday, Denise confirmed. She said you were overreacting to her little reorganization of your sewing room. Eleanor's lips tightened. Is that why you're here? To convince me to change my mind? Actually, no, Denise said, reaching into the bag. I'm here because of this. She pulled out a neatly folded quilt, not her mother's, but the baby quilt Eleanor had been working on for Michael and Kara's new baby. The one Melissa had carelessly unpinned and crumpled into a storage bin. How did you? Eleanor began, reaching for the quilt with trembling hands. Melissa showed it to me last week when I stopped by, Denise explained. She was proudly showing off her closet renovation and mentioned that she'd put away your quilting stuff. When I saw this beautiful quilt all folded up with pins still in it, I was horrified. I asked if I could borrow it to show my mom she's a quilter too, but really, I took it home and tried to salvage it. Eleanor carefully unfolded the quilt. The pins had been removed, and the pieces that had been displaced when Melissa folded it had been carefully repositioned and basted in place. It wasn't perfect. Some of the intricate piecing Eleanor had done was still slightly distorted, but it was far better than she'd feared. Denise, I don't know what to say, Eleanor whispered, tears filling her eyes. Thank you so much for this. Denise smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. My mom taught me to respect other people's creative work. She would have been appalled at what Melissa did. Eleanor carefully laid the quilt on the kitchen table, smoothing her hand over the soft fabric pieces, the blue and yellow stars that would match the nursery Kara was preparing for their new little boy. There's more, Denise said, reaching into the bag again. She pulled out several fat quarters of fabric, still with Eleanor's handwritten labels pinned to them. I recognized these from your stash when I saw them at the church thrift store. I bought them back. The tears Eleanor had been holding back spilled over. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Denise said firmly. What Melissa did wasn't right, and I want you to know that not everyone thinks you're overreacting by selling the house. Eleanor wiped her eyes, studying the younger woman's face. You've spoken to her about it? Denise nodded. I tried to explain to her how serious what she did was. I compared it to someone throwing away her expensive makeup collection or donating her designer shoes without asking. She still doesn't fully get it, but I think she's starting to realize this isn't just about stuff. It never was. Eleanor confirmed quietly. It's about respect, boundaries, recognizing that just because I'm her mother doesn't mean I don't have my own life, my own passions. For what it's worth, Denise said, I think what you're doing is brave. Standing up for yourself is hard, especially with family. They talked for another hour, Denise sharing stories about her own mother's quilting projects and Eleanor showing her photos of quilts she'd made over the years. When Denise finally left, Eleanor felt lighter somehow, as if the understanding of this unexpected ally had eased some of the burden she'd been carrying. The next morning, Sarah called with exciting news. The Thompsons had made an offer on the house, slightly above asking price, with a request for a quick closing. They're pre-approved for the mortgage, and they'd like to move in before their baby arrives in 2 months, Sarah explained. This is about as smooth as it gets, Eleanor. Eleanor took a deep breath. Then I accept their offer. Just like that? You don't want time to think about it? I've done my thinking, Sarah. This feels right. After hanging up, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, staring at the acceptance papers Sarah had emailed over. With a few signatures, she would be officially letting go of the home where she'd raised her children, loved her husband, and found herself again after his death. She was still sitting there, pen in hand, when Melissa came downstairs, looking groggy and rumpled from sleep. "Morning," she mumbled, heading straight for the coffee maker. "Good morning," Eleanor replied. Sarah called. "We have an offer on the house." Melissa froze, coffee scoop in midair. "Already? But it's only been a day." "It's a good market," Eleanor said simply. "And it's a good offer, I'm accepting it." Melissa slowly set down the coffee scoop, turning to face her mother. "So this is really happening, you're really going through with it?" It wasn't quite a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "Yes, I am." Melissa sank into a chair across from Eleanor, her usual defensiveness noticeably absent. "I saw Denise's car here last night when I got home. Did she come to see you?" Eleanor nodded. "She brought back my baby quilt, the one I was making for Michael and Kara's new baby. She tried to repair the damage from when you unpinned it and folded it up." Melissa had the grace to look ashamed. "I didn't realize. I mean, I knew you were working on it, but I didn't think." "You didn't think it mattered," Eleanor finished for her. "But it did matter, Melissa. It mattered a great deal." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound, the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock that had hung on the wall since before Melissa was born. "Denise said I really hurt you," Melissa finally said, her voice small. "She said it wasn't just about the sewing stuff, but about disrespect." Eleanor looked at her. Daughter really looked at her. Beyond the defensive posture and the hint of the teenage girl who had once slammed doors and declared her mother would never understand, she saw a woman struggling to find her footing in an adulthood that hadn't gone according to plan. "Yes," she said gently. "It hurt to have the one space that was truly mine dismantled without my permission, but what hurt more was hearing you dismiss my passion for quilting as something trivial. Something age-appropriate, as if at 62 I should only be interested in sedentary, stereotypical old lady hobbies." Melissa winced at having her words repeated back to her. "I didn't mean it like that." "Maybe not consciously," Eleanor acknowledged, "but it revealed how you see Menno as a whole person with my own interests and talents, but just as mom. The person who has always been there to support you, to make space for you, to put your needs first." Melissa opened her mouth as if to argue, then closed it again, looking thoughtful. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted. "I guess I've always just seen you as Mom, not as Eleanor." "Most children do," Eleanor said with a small smile. "It's natural, but I'm both your mother and Eleanor Mason, quilter, reader, gardener, widow, friend. All of those parts make up who I am." Melissa nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective. "So, what happens now? With the house sale, I mean." "If all goes well with the inspection, we'll close in about 30 days. I've already put a deposit on an apartment at Riverside Senior Community. I can move in as early as next week." "That's fast," Melissa said, sounding a bit lost. "Yes, it is, which means you should start looking for a place of your own soon." Eleanor kept her tone gentle but firm. "I have been, actually," Melissa admitted. "After you first said you were selling, I called a few apartment complexes. There's one near my new job that has a unit available next month." Eleanor felt a surge of pride at this evidence of her daughter taking responsibility. "That's wonderful, Melissa." "It's nothing fancy," Melissa hastened to add. "Just a one-bedroom, but it's in a decent neighborhood and I can afford it on my new salary." "I'm proud of you for taking that step," Eleanor said honestly. Melissa looked surprised, then pleased at the praise. "Thanks, Mom." Over the next few days, a strange new equilibrium established itself in the Mason household. Melissa seemed to be making an effort to be more considerate, asking before using Eleanor's things and even helping with the packing. Eleanor, for her part, found herself relaxing slightly, the urgency of her need to escape diminishing as her boundaries were better respected. The home inspection went smoothly, with only minor issues that Eleanor agreed to address before closing. Sarah brought over the final paperwork, which Eleanor signed with a mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. 30 days, Sarah said as she collected the signed documents. How are you feeling about it? Ready, Eleanor replied, surprising herself with how true it felt. It's time for a new chapter. That evening, Michael and his family came over for dinner. Melissa had offered to cook another small but significant gesture that Eleanor appreciated. As they gathered around the dining room table that had hosted countless family meals, Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude for these people, despite the recent tensions. I have something to share with everyone, Eleanor said as they finished the main course. All eyes turned to her expectantly. The house sale is officially in process. We'll close in 30 days. Michael nodded, reaching over to squeeze her hand. We're here for you, Mom. Whatever you need during the transition. Yeah, Jason added, his 16-year-old earnestness touching. I can help move the heavy stuff. And Grandma, your new place sounds pretty cool from what Dad told me. Like having a gym and stuff right there. Eleanor smiled at her grandson. It is cool. And there's a guest room for when you want to visit. It won't be the same as coming here, but we'll make new memories. As long as I still get your famous snickerdoodles, I'm good, Jason declared, making everyone laugh. After dinner, as Kara helped Eleanor with the dishes, she broached a subject Eleanor hadn't expected. I was wondering, Kara said hesitantly, if you might have time to finish the baby quilt before little Thomas arrives. I know it's a lot to ask with everything else going on. Eleanor paused in drying a plate, touched that Kara had remembered the quilt she'd been working on. You know about that. Kara smiled. Michael told me. He said it was one of the things that got damaged when Melissa rearranged your sewing room. Eleanor appreciated her daughter-in-law's diplomatic phrasing. Actually, Melissa's friend Denise rescued it and repaired most of the damage. I would love to finish it for the baby. That would mean so much to us, Kara said, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Especially since you're naming him after Dad, Eleanor added softly. Kara's eyes misted slightly. Michael insisted. He said his father was the best man he'd ever known, and he wanted his son to have that name to live up to. Eleanor felt her own eyes grow damp. Thomas would have been so proud of all of you. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Eleanor sat on the back porch, watching fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk. The yard was smaller than she remembered from when the children were young, running through the sprinkler on hot summer days or building snow forts in winter. Melissa joined her silently, 2 mugs of tea in hand. She offered one to Eleanor, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. I've been thinking, Melissa said after a few minutes of companionable silence, about what you said about seeing you as just Mom and not as a whole person. I think you're right. Eleanor turned to look at her daughter, surprised by this admission. When Dad died, Melissa continued, I was so focused on my own grief that I never really thought about what it meant for you, not just losing your husband, but having to rebuild your entire life, find a new identity. It wasn't easy, Eleanor acknowledged. For a long time, I felt like I was just going through the motions. But eventually, I realized I needed to figure out who Eleanor was without Thomas. Quilting became a big part of that. I didn't know, Melissa said softly. I mean, I knew you liked to sew, but I didn't understand how important it was to you, how it helped you heal. Eleanor sipped her tea, considering her next words carefully. There's a lot we don't know about each other, Melissa. We're related, but in many ways, we're still strangers. Maybe that's natural between parents and children, but I'd like it to be different going forward. I'd like that too, Melissa said, surprising Eleanor again. Maybe, maybe we could have dinner once a week after we've both moved, just to stay connected. The simple suggestion touched Eleanor deeply. I would love that. As the fireflies multiplied, their gentle lights blinking in the growing darkness, mother and daughter sat together, not solving all their problems or erasing the hurt of the past, but perhaps beginning to build something new, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than just familial obligation. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor's apartment at Riverside was ready earlier than expected, and she decided to move in right away rather than staying in the increasingly empty house. Michael and Jason came over on Saturday morning with a rented truck, and by afternoon, Eleanor was settling into her new home. The apartment was smaller than what she was used to, but it felt cozy rather than cramped. The living room had large windows overlooking a landscaped courtyard, and the second bedroom was perfect for her sewing supplies, which Michael had carefully moved from the storage unit. "What do you think, Mom?" Michael asked as they arranged her favorite armchair near the window. Eleanor looked around at the space that was now hers alone, a blank canvas for this next chapter of her life. "I think it's perfect." That evening, after Michael and Jason had gone home, Eleanor sat in her new living room, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, and felt a profound sense of peace. There was work to be done, certainly, but she had time. All the time in the world to arrange her new home exactly as she wanted it. Her phone chimed with a text message from Melissa. "Apartment application approved. Moving in 2 weeks. Thank you for everything, Mom. Love you." Eleanor smiled as she typed her reply. "Congratulations. Let me know if you need help with the move. Love you too." It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still conversations to be had, boundaries to be established, wounds to be healed, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Eleanor woke early, feeling rested in a way she hadn't in months. She made herself a cup of coffee and carried it to the small balcony off her kitchen, watching as the sun rose over the community gardens where residents tended their own small plots of vegetables and flowers. An elderly gentleman was already at work in one of the plots, carefully watering a row of tomato plants. He looked up, noticing Eleanor on her balcony, and waved cheerfully. She waved back, feeling a flutter of something she hadn't expected possibility. After breakfast, Eleanor ventured down to the community crafting room she'd been told about during her tour. It was early and she had the space to herself. Large tables filled the center of the room, surrounded by storage cabinets where residents could keep projects in progress. Several sewing machines were set up along one wall, and a design wall covered another. Eleanor unpacked her sewing basket and the salvaged baby quilt. She ran her hands over the fabric pieces, assessing what needed to be done to complete it before baby Thomas arrived. Some sections would need to be completely redone, but most of Denise's repairs had held well. As she began to work, the familiar rhythm of needle and thread soothed her soul. This was who she was, Eleanor Mason, quilter, creator, woman of substance and worth. A mother, yes, but so much more. By lunchtime, she'd made significant progress on the quilt. As she was packing up to return to her apartment, another resident entered the craft room, a woman about her own age, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob. "You must be new," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Grace Chen. I coordinate the quilting circle that meets here on Thursdays." "Eleanor Mason," she replied, returning the smile. "I just moved in yesterday." Grace's eyes lit up when she saw the baby quilt. "Oh, that's lovely work. Are you making it for a grandchild?" "Yes, my second. A little boy due in about 6 weeks." "Well, you must join our group," Grace insisted. We're a lively bunch, 8 women and one very brave man who makes the most incredible art quilts you've ever seen. Eleanor felt a spark of excitement at the thought of connecting with other quilters. I'd love to, thank you. As she walked back to her apartment, Eleanor reflected on how different this move had turned out from what she'd initially imagined. When she'd first made the decision to sell the house, it had been primarily an act of self-preservation, a desperate need to reclaim her dignity and establish boundaries with her daughter. But somewhere along the way, it had transformed into something more positive, an embrace of new possibilities rather than just an escape from disrespect. She wasn't just leaving something behind, she was moving towards something new. The weeks leading up to the closing on her house passed quickly. Eleanor fell into a pleasant routine at Riverside, making new friends, joining not only the quilting circle but also a book club and a gardening committee. She finished the baby quilt with time to spare and presented it to Michael and Cara at their baby shower, where it was received with tears and hugs. Melissa found her footing too, settling into her new apartment and job with an enthusiasm Eleanor hadn't seen in her since before her divorce. Their weekly dinners became a cherished tradition, sometimes at Eleanor's place, sometimes at Melissa's, occasionally at a restaurant halfway between their new homes. The night before the closing, Eleanor visited her old house one last time. It was empty now, all traces of the Mason family removed, ready for the Thompsons to begin their own story within its walls. Eleanor walked through each room slowly, saying goodbye. In the master bedroom, she paused longest, remembering Thomas and the life they'd shared. In what had been her sewing room and then briefly Melissa's closet, she smiled, recognizing that if Melissa hadn't violated that space, she might never have found the courage to make this change. As she stood in the empty living room, keys in hand, ready to leave for the final time, Eleanor felt not sadness, but gratitude. This house had sheltered her family through joy and sorrow, through celebrations and arguments, through all the messy, beautiful complexity of life. "Thank you," she whispered to the silent walls, "and goodbye." The next morning, Eleanor met Sarah and the Thompsons at the title company. The closing went smoothly, paperwork signed and exchanged, congratulations offered. Mrs. Thompson, Jessica, as she'd asked Eleanor to call her, was visibly pregnant now, her hand often resting on her rounded belly. "We can't thank you enough, Mrs. Mason," Jessica said as they prepared to leave. "The house is perfect for our family." "I hope you'll be as happy there as we were," Eleanor replied sincerely. As she handed over the keys, Eleanor felt the symbolic weight of the moment, the final surrender of her old life, the complete embrace of the new. But there was no regret, only a sense of rightness. That afternoon, Melissa came over to Eleanor's apartment for an impromptu celebration. She brought a small cake and a gift bag, which she presented somewhat shyly to her mother. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, opening the bag. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with Eleanor's initials embossed on the cover. "I thought you might want to write about this new chapter," Melissa explained, "and maybe about the past too. There's so much about your life I don't know, about you and Dad, about who you were before you were my mom. I'd like to learn if you're willing to share." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes as she ran her fingers over the soft leather. "This is beautiful, Melissa. Thank you. And yes, I'd love to share those stories with you." As they shared cake and reminisced about the old house, Eleanor felt a deep contentment settle in her soul. The path here hadn't been easy or straight. It had taken courage to stand up for herself, to value her own needs enough to make such a dramatic change. But sitting here in her new home, with her daughter who was slowly learning to see her as a complete person, Eleanor knew it had been worth it. In asserting her boundaries, she hadn't just preserved her dignity, she'd opened the door to a richer, more authentic relationship with her daughter and a vibrant new phase of her own life. Later, after Melissa had gone, Eleanor took the journal to her small balcony and opened it to the first blank page. She thought for a moment, then began to write. Today marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I've learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to create boundaries. And I've discovered that sometimes what feels like an ending can actually be the most beautiful beginning. Her pen moved across the page, recording not just what had happened, but what she had learned about herself, about relationships, about the courage it takes to choose yourself even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, reminiscent of that Hawaiian sunset with Thomas years ago, Eleanor paused in her writing and looked out over her new community. In the garden below, the elderly gentleman she'd seen that first morning was again tending his plants. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and waved. Eleanor waved back, a smile spreading across her face. Yes, this was exactly where she was meant to be. Not despite selling her home in response to her daughter's actions, but because of it. That violation of her space had been the catalyst she needed to create something new, a life that honored all of who she was, not just her role as mother and widow. She turned back to her journal and wrote one final line for the day. Sometimes, the greatest gift someone can give you is the push you need to finally choose yourself. And in Eleanor's case, that push had come from her daughter turning her sewing room into a closet act that had seemed like an ending, but had ultimately been the beginning of the most unexpected and rewarding chapter of her life.